Welcome to the Lift Your Story podcast with guest Austen Johnson, author, book cover designer, disability advocate, and publishing expert. Hi, everyone. I'm Lorianne. I am that gal from Milton, Ontario, Canada, and I'm with...
I am that guy. I am Roy Miller from Dallas, Texas. Welcome to our Lift Your Story podcast.
In this episode, we're pleased to have Austen Johnson. She's an award-winning author, book cover designer, disability advocate, and publishing expert. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Welcome. So can you tell us about the books you've written?
Sure. So my first book was actually a poetry collection when I was still in school. Basically, I had to take time off of school because I got really sick. And during that time, I was writing a lot and sort of figuring out, what do I do? Since I'm not in school, I was very academically motivated. So not having schoolwork was actually kind of a gut punch for me. So I decided to compile my work, edit it, send it out to publishers. So that was published when I was 21. And then since then, I've written mostly short works. So romance novellas, which came out last year, sort of to counteract the gloom of 2020. And then I also wrote some short stories. But I write fantasy, and that's what I'm querying out to agents right now.
Very good. You were saying that you struggled with chronic illnesses.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I was diagnosed with a chronic illness when I was 18. And I was very able-bodied before then. I did a lot of sports. This was a very new thing for me. And it sort of just progressed to the point where I kept picking up more and more. Once you get one, then a couple sort of piggyback on. So now I have about 3 different chronic conditions that I deal with. And it led to the point, like I said, where I dropped out of school for a semester. I ended up going back and graduating on time, but it was definitely debilitating. I had to go in for infusions every other month. So, I couldn't do the internships I wanted to. But that also led me to this other route of remote work. And I know we're all sort of remote right now because of COVID, but I was doing that beforehand, partially out of desire and partially out of necessity from these illnesses. I decided to work remotely in publishing because I love books, and it also was very convenient for me to work on my schedule so that I could go see doctors and take time off if I needed to, like if I had to stay in bed all day, something like that. So that's why I ended up doing the sort of freelance gig lifestyle that I do now, which allows me to both write and also work on other people's books.
Fantastic.
So you are a publisher then?
So I work with publishers. I make book covers and I edit people's books. I am not myself a publisher.
Okay. I just want to clarify that. Okay. So as far as I understand the editing, but as far as the covers go, you do design or?
Yeah, exactly. So actually last year, I had been doing book covers on a freelance basis before, but last year I launched my own company, which is called All About Book Covers. And basically it's a website where you can either get a pre-made book cover, basically a cover that has all the elements you want in your cover, and then you just tell me your title and your name and I'll fill it in for you. Or you can get a custom cover. But the pre-made is really accessible for indie authors because they tend to be cheaper and they can also browse on their own time without needing to take a lot of time out for meetings on cover design or the stress of finding a good artist. They can browse a bit more, like buying a t-shirt, something like that. So that's what I do now for authors. And if I were only freelance, I would sort of just be limited to whatever my current client wants. Whereas if I make pre-mades, I can make whatever I like. And then if people like it, they'll buy it. If they don't, that's fine. And it'll be in the inventory anyway.
Okay.
Idea.
So you said your first books of poems you wrote, I guess, early on, maybe when you're like a kid, maybe?
Yeah, it's a collection of probably like ages 18 to 20 of poems from then.
And so you are a disability advocate. Let's hear a little bit more about that. I think that's great.
Yeah.
Sure. So because I have chronic illnesses, I consider myself to be disabled, meaning that I can't do everything that everyone else can do, at least not at the same pace. So one way this manifests in my life is I write about disability in my works. So I have characters who have disabilities, and also my poetry collection has poems about the experience of living with chronic illnesses. And then when I do talks like this, or when I interview with media outlets, I like to say that I'm anti-hustle culture. So a lot of freelancers have to rely on the hustle culture mentality because they have to seem that they're always doing something so that people hire them. I'm sort of against that because I think that it can put a lot of pressure on people to like compare themselves to other people and try to do as much work as other people. Where, I mean, if you're like me and you can work maybe 3 to 4 days a week consistently, it's not a good mindset to have to compare yourself. So I really try to push that even when I'm talking about my work. Like I don't like to put an age limit on when you can get published. I like to tell authors it doesn't matter. I don't think anyone should feel rushed into doing all of these things. And I think hustle culture, especially that we see on Instagram, social media, can make people feel pressured to, oh, if I don't get a book out by 30, I'm hopeless or nothing matters. But it's fine. You know, in creative fields, like I think you really have to be patient with yourself. So that's a big part of what I do when I talk about disability and illnesses.
It's really nice. Speaking of books, I wrote one when I came up with the character when I was 18, wrote a book when I was 20, and I didn't publish it until I was 50. So there you
Wow, yeah.
go. So you're right. Time is not an issue.
You know, I have a daughter-in-law that is starting to have health issues, and she's got an autoimmune disease, and it's leading into other things, just like you said, and she's really struggling with it, you know, because she's a stay-at-home mom, but she has a little jewelry business, you know, and she's having a lot of issues with that, and so. And it seems like my son says, she's going to a different specialist every day. It seems like, you know,
Yeah.
and you know, it's something she struggles with. So it's nice to hear that, you know, like just like you're making it, you're doing it. You know, it's a workaround. You know, and that's kind of the same thing she's going through.
Yeah, and just, you know, for her and other people listening who may have this, like it's okay to feel exhausted. Right now I'm seeing about 15 different specialists and it's like basically a part-time job to keep that track. So it's fine to feel exhausted and you're not doing something wrong if you feel tired. Like working all the time, it's okay to feel tired.
I think that's good. That's a good thing to say to most everybody too. You know, the ones that
Yeah.
but yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so the advocacy, is it primarily with your books that you're doing that, or are you part of the
Yeah, primarily with my books. And then I do media placements where I talk about chronic illness and mental health. And then also the intersection of those with writing in a creative career, which, you know, sort of demands a lot from you, like emotionally already.
Absolutely.
Do you do any speaking engagements?
I mean, I do podcasts like this. I get actually a little bit of stage fright, which may be a little silly, but I find it's easier to compose myself in writing or more one-on-one situation.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Now, do you have your own podcast, or are you just like a guest on podcasts?
No, I'm just a guest. My creative outlets are mostly the book covers and then the books that I write.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. You know, we've interviewed a lot of people that are authors, you know, and a lot of those people do public speaking as well, you know. So that's why I was just curious. Maybe you did public speaking since you're an advocate. I thought maybe you might be into that realm as well.
Yeah, but you're not alone with that fear, by the way. We had two guests that were speaking that they help people to get on stage, and
yeah. I'm sure I could use their help. I find it very easy in like a news article or something to compose my thoughts, but in front of a big crowd of people, I get so nervous.
and it's sort of funny because one of them said, you know, when you're going on a podcast, you are public speaking because this is going out to, you know, how many, you know, thousands or whatever people. But I guess it's just because you don't see the crowd, you don't think about it, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's safe.
Yeah. So are you working on any new books now that are coming out that you want to speak to?
Sure. So actually, one of my stories is coming out in audiobook later this year. So it's called True Loaf. It's a short story, but it's basically a fairy tale. It's inspired by Balkan folklore. So I did a lot of research into sort of the tropes of this before writing the story. And it's already out in ebook right now, but the audiobook will help open it to a bigger market. If we're talking about accessibility, I mean, a lot of people need screen readers or audiobooks to help. It's just sort of cost prohibitive to do for every book if you're indie. But this one, it works out. So I'm excited to bring it to more people. And I'm also currently querying some fantasy works that have both queer representation and disability representation. So those I'm sending out to authors. I do a lot in like the folklore fairy tale space because I like that sort of magical realism feel of it's basically our reality, but things can be slightly different, you know?
That's a real popular genre
Mm-hmm.
nowadays. I mean, it's huge. And did you do your own voiceover for your audiobook?
No, so I actually hired someone who's trained, but funny you ask, I did do the voiceover for a few books for clients. I took a couple voiceover classes and I enjoyed it. So I narrated some children's books. But I thought for mine, I wanted someone who was British, to be honest, because it's a fairy tale. I thought it sounded a bit more mysterious. That's my like American bias showing, I think.
I like that though. Makes sense. In
Yeah.
fact, speaking of folklore, though, I grew up with it. I mean, I lived in Turkey when I was a kid. My mother
Mm-hmm.
bought these books of Turkish folklore, and it was just fascinating, you know. And as a kid, when you're reading them, you're just sitting there going, wow. You know, like you said, it's a little bit of real and a little bit of the fairy tale side of it. Just love those. Yeah.
Yeah, when you're a kid, you got the open mind. There's no, oh, this couldn't be real. Oh, this couldn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's possible, right? So you escape right into it.
I agree. I also think it's a good genre to talk about trauma or things that affect people because you can sort of make it more representational with the fantasy elements, but it's still grounded in this reality. So I think the fabric of it being a little more flexible is very good when you're talking about you being affected. This is why a lot of people go to it when they talk about sexual assaults or intergenerational trauma with like the Black community. Or like for me, it would be illness or mental health of like how that actually affects your existence. I think you can sort of dramatize it a bit more and give it a physical manifestation when you're doing fantasy versus, you know, nonfiction or something.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned trauma because it seems like lately a lot of our people we've interviewed, for whatever reason, have went through trauma, and
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize there was that much out there, but there's quite a bit.
Sure. Yeah. And I while getting diagnosed with these illnesses has affected me and I put them in that same category. I'm not here to say that they're the exact same as, you know, other things that people can face. I think it's just in terms of things that affect certain people that don't necessarily affect everyone and trying to navigate placing yourself in there. Like for me, I sort of had to come to terms with before I was diagnosed with the illness, they were thinking it was cancer, right? So here at 18, I'm a bit nervous. I just started college. So I was away from home and I was like, okay, so how do I deal with this? Or how do I deal with the idea that like your body is sort of degenerating or like fighting against your mind and having these two things separate in a way that was never separate for me as a child or in a teen. I think that it can be like a type of trauma or at least something that is effective enough that it will change your perspective on things. I sort of get now why I study medieval literature for my master's program. I sort of get now why they think the soul and the body are like completely separate and can have different journeys. Because for me, I'm like, yeah, my mind and my body don't always communicate and do, you know, what I want them to do in sync.
Wow. I like that saying.
Yeah, that's kind of like, you got a lot of parallels to my to my daughter-in-law, you know.
Hmm.
So I kind of I get it because I know what she's struggling with. I don't think she maybe has much going on with her yet that you do.
Hmm.
That she may be on her way. But
Sure. I mean, it can be scary at any stage too, just the idea that, oh, there's this new information in my life that I didn't even think about. I'm assuming she's like relatively young too, that
yeah, she's in her mid 40s. Yeah.
yeah, I think if you're on the younger side, you can also be like, this is happening this soon. What do I have to look forward to when I'm, 70, 80?
Yeah, yeah, and definitely that's one of her big concerns is, I'm reasonably young. What is it going to be like in 5 years or 10 years?
Hmm.
So yeah, it's a lot of stress on her and my son and the
Yeah, I
kids
completely
too.
understand.
Yeah, yeah,
No, it does. It affects the whole family. I find it interesting. I actually related but separate that I think more people can relate to is right now I'm going through the BRCA testing. So basically it's a breast cancer gene that if you have this, you're, between 60 and 80% more likely to get breast cancer than anyone else. So it gets passed down in families. So my family tested my older generation, some people tested positive. So I'm going and getting this testing. And it's something that like, even if I didn't have the chronic illness, this would increase my chances and sort of reframe my, I don't know, relationship of my current self with my future self, where I have to really think about, okay, if I'm positive for this gene, what does that mean for 40-year-old me, 50-year-old me, in a way that like I'm 24. I don't think most mid 20-year-olds are necessarily doing this kind of thinking. So that's also something that I'm sure a lot of women can relate to if they end up getting this genetic testing for BRCA, BRCA.
Well, do you know if you end up testing positive for this, is it something that now that you know that can be maybe uh, dealt with, maybe prevented, or is it
Mm-hmm.
just a genetic thing that's going to happen?
So it's sort of a double-edged sword. It's like you think it would be a negative to test positive for this, and it is. But on the other hand, I caught it early if I test positive. So that means that I could get a double mastectomy, a hysterectomy. I could get MRIs done every year if I wanted, if I didn't want to get surgeries. So it'd be something that I know what to expect, so I can catch it because it would happen either way. I would still have been positive even if I never tested for it. So at least this, I have the knowledge to move forward with this. And I think diagnoses in general for people with illnesses, it's like, yes, it's not always fun to get diagnosed, but once you get diagnosed, there's like a sense of relief of, okay, but at least I know how to approach this now. And at least I can try to try to do this. I think for me, it was way more frustrating. For example, I have fibromyalgia as one of my diagnoses. So it's a pain condition. And I was waking up all the time with pain. I'm like, why is this happening? My other illness is under control. I don't understand. And then when I got the diagnosis, and then they gave me next steps of like things to do to help treat it, I felt relief. I wasn't, as upset because I knew that getting this would help me sort of get to a better state of communicating with my body in a positive, healthy way.
I would agree with that because I remember, and I'm very lucky about this, but I remember when right after I had my first son, I got really sick and all of my joints hurt everywhere. I couldn't even roll in bed without it hurting. And we went to the hospital, and of course, we were Canadian in the US at this point, so we had to spend all this money for these tests. Worst case is they came back without knowing what it was. They thought it might be lupus, but they weren't sure. Now that condition went away, but that uncertainty is what you're saying. Yeah, if they can find it and tell you what it is, then you know what you're dealing with. And of course, I was a little bit fearful for a while, but luckily, like I said, it didn't come back again. But I didn't know what I was up against at that time, and that's disconcerting when you don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's kind of what my daughter-in-law went through because when started having issues, she'd go to one guy. Well, I'm not really sure. It could be this or this. And then we'll go see so and so. Well, yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure, but maybe you ought to go. And she was going all over because nobody could really say what it was. And then finally, one guy said, "Yeah, I know exactly what this is," and told her, said, "Here's the process, of treatment, and here's what to expect."
Yeah.
And then he told her, he says, "Now, just be aware that, we can work on this, but you may have other issues due to this. So be prepared that we can maybe get this under control, but it's not to say that something else is not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, she felt better knowing, okay, now I know what I've got. I know what I need to do. And I've got to be aware if something else happens, then, I'm ready. Well, more quote unquote, I'm ready for it. I know now. And so that was a lot of comfort to her, from going to doctor to doctor to doctor. Well, it could be this, it could be that. We're not sure, and because, that uncertainty will drive you nuts.
Yeah.
And it was.
And it's interesting though, women get autoimmune conditions in a much higher percentage than men. And so we have this sort of two-factor interplay here where women have a higher chance of having an autoimmune illness, but also like historically in the medical system, women's pain are not necessarily believed at the same level as men's pain, or the way that we communicate about pain may be different because our bodies are different. So you have these two things that sort of can make it hard to get diagnosed or easier, or I don't know. I think it's very interesting how this ends up working. And I'm sure, for your daughter-in-law, like this happened to me, where part of the reason I bounced around to different doctors was because finding someone who would listen in a way that worked with my communication on what was happening with my body was difficult.
Well, okay, I'm going to go ahead and put this out there. I'm going to say it in public. Women do deal with pain better than men do. They do.
I guess we have to, the childbirth thing.
Yes.
But that's true. It really is. And, maybe because of childbirth or whatever, but I think women do handle pain much better than men do.
It's still, though, what you said, it's hard. Like you go to a doctor and they'll say on a scale from 1 to 10, but everybody's pain points are different. So you could say, well, for me, it's a 6, but if it was someone else, it'd probably be an 8, or it's an 8, but for someone else, it might be a 5. Like, so hard. I always I don't get asked often, but a couple of times I have, and I'm thinking, I really don't know what to say here.
The thing that kills me are the smiley faces, where the scale is the smiley face, and then they just get more and more frowning. I'm like, I don't think, like, only the 10 is crying. I'm like, you would definitely cry before a level 10 pain. That's like max pain.
Well, it's like my mom. She's got a high tolerance to pain. And when she finally ends up having to go to the doctor, they'll say, oh my gosh, you should have come in a week ago. Well, I thought it'd go away, And he says, please don't wait this long to come back. Come right away. There's no use suffering for a week when you could have came in. We could have taken care of this a week ago, and it wouldn't have been near as painful for you. So yeah.
I get that, though. I'll give it a week to see if it gets better.
Yeah.
I want to go right away.
Every day. It's worse and worse every day.
I was a little bit of what do they call them when they go to the doctor all the time?
A hypochondriac.
Yeah, when I was in my 20s. And once I got over that, now I'm the opposite. Like, my doctors are saying, you really should be coming in every 2 years, not every 10 years. It's like, but yeah, kind of went the other way. So, yeah. So, well, this is great. I really, really appreciate you being here and sharing your story. I think that the other thing too, with your age, I think it's wonderful to share at your age at 24 to say, work on it now, because there are some that I think there's some women that are afraid to be, that burden, and they won't speak to it. And I think that's important. And you don't want to wait until later when it's, like you said, it might be too late. So good for you for what you're doing, and congratulations on your books and your book cover business. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Really impressive.
So how can our listeners reach out to you?
Sure. I have a website, laustenjohnson.com. It's Austen like Jane Austen, so it has an E. And you can contact me there, or all my social media is listed there. If you just search my name, you'll be able to find me. And the book cover website, if you are somehow in the market, is allaboutbookcovers.com.
Okay.
Easy to remember.
Yeah,
Thanks again.
good deal.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being our guest. We really enjoyed meeting you and having you with us today.
Absolutely.
Thank you both, and best of luck to your daughter-in-law.
Yeah, thank you very much.
All right.
Okay.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Be sure to visit us at lifterstory.com.